Good morning, Apex University. My name is Dan and I'll be your coach for today. So in my previous videos you've probably noticed me talking a lot about advantages and disadvantages, how you want to have as many advantages as possible when you start a fight. And today I want to talk a little bit about how to recognize those advantages and how to overcompensate for any disadvantages you might find yourself with. Because inevitably in a game like a BR there's going to be too many things that factor into how a situation plays out. It's not possible to start any fight perfectly. There's always going to be some disadvantages, whether it's the opponent having more people with them, having better gear, having better aim than you, or a better position. Anything like that can happen, and so you want to find ways to overcompensate for it. And today we're going to look at I'm on 500 ping, by the way, which is a great name. And he's playing Wraith, and we're just going to talk a bit about how to assess whether you're going to be at an advantage or disadvantage, or how do you stack up in any given situation. So you decide to drop alone at Watchtower while you know that your team is going to the water treatment, and I hear no communication so far between you and your team to decide who goes where, whether you'll meet up in the middle. So far we instantly know a possible disadvantage in this situation is that you're alone, and that might make you vulnerable if people drop near you. So what I want to see you do is scout around and be certain that you are alone, or if there are enemies close to you, where they are. A possible advantage is that there is more loot within this area for you to gear yourself out before you get into a possible fight. And another one is stealth. Right now your position is not very stealthy because anyone that dropped repulsor has a straight sideline down on you as soon as they leave the wall, and they can spot pretty easily even if they don't see you whether the containers outside have been opened. But other than that, if you hear people fighting, which you do in repulsor, and you decide you want to engage on that, you can approach much more stealthily than you would with a team. So you can use that stealth to get into an advantageous position or find an enemy that is vulnerable and start the fight with an advantage that way. So there are disadvantages to being alone, but if you play to it well, there's still a lot you can do. So let's have a look at that and see how you approach this fight. The smoke actually gives you a perfectly stealthy entrance here, but instead of using that stealth to get to a good position or find out some information, you just run in and take on a little more than you can handle. And I also really would have liked to see you use your void walk there. That's a perfect opportunity to make up for your mistake in just rushing in. I do really like that you climb up. You should crouch and move a little less here. You don't need to peek out this long either. Now you're about to re-peek and he turned around, he can see you and ping you right now, so it's time to relocate before using this next syringe. Other than that, I still really like you going up here. Luckily they don't appear to be aware of you. They should, but they are not, which is very nice, and you finish the fight just like that. Found some more ammo and a digi, so that's pretty lucky early on, but there are still more enemies. You're a bit haphazard with this looting, and you just picked up 2 light weapons, which early game, when you don't have that much ammo and you're alone versus a bunch of enemies, might not be ideal. Just something to think about, but I also understand that that was a quick swap while you got shot at. You're hanging on one side a bit too long here. Now you don't get punished for it right now, but you're giving the enemies a lot of opportunity to, res, relocate, figure out where you are, throw nades, whatever they need to do, they have the opportunity to do. So this relocating you're doing now, scouting around, being less predictable and being on the move is far better. You could have thirsted this opponent already, since nobody is nearby, especially on this patch where the sound of downed enemies is very loud. It can be worthwhile to finish them if you are safe, to make sure that you can actually hear enemies coming. Right here it's a bit risky to climb straight into the opponent. Now he is luckily the last guy and you managed to beat him, but a better player would have certainly punished you the moment you climbed up. He also should have already known where you were, so that was more of him playing that very poorly than you playing it well. But you got the kills, very well done. And now I want to talk a little bit about your choice of weapon swapping here. So you're running with the Devotion R301 now, and the reason I want to talk about weapon swapping, or which weapons you decide to pick here, is because especially if you're going to go about it alone a lot, you really want to have some versatility in your loadout. And the way you do that is by finding weapons that have different use cases. Usually a long and a close range weapon, a medium and a close range weapon, weapons that have different purposes. What you're running right now, a Devotion and an R301, they pretty much serve the same purpose. Now there's advantages and disadvantages to both, and they're definitely not the same, but they have pretty much the same effective range and the same effective use cases, so there's not really a point in running both of them together. Instead, you had a digi-threat, you had the opportunity to take a Prowler or an Alternator, which you could then later swap out for an R99 when you find one, depending on your preference, and then for longer range you could do either the Devotion or the R301, or I believe you even saw a flatline there as well. So there are plenty of combinations to whichever weapon you prefer, but try to combine in any way that hopefully uses two different ammo types, unless one of them is very conservative with ammo, such as a wingman or a shotgun. So something like an R301 and an Alternator is not ideal, because if you run out of ammo, if you run out of light ammo, you've got nothing. But any other combination would be good. Alright, after you've looted up and you've cleared the fight, your team has finally caught up with you on Watchtower, and the first thing you decide to do when your teammates have caught up with you is to leave them again. Now luckily, while you were on the zipline towards the balloon, the redeploy, you do actually ping where you are going. This is the first time. I would very much like to see you do this a bit earlier. You are not giving your teammates the proper opportunity to follow you or figure out what you are doing, so if you fall for the disadvantage of being alone, which you had just now finally gotten rid of, then it's your own fault, so you have to play around that and be aware of that. As well as your teammate showed you where the next zone is going to be, and you're moving towards the outside of it, which means that a possible advantage you have is that it will be easier for you to get to the new zone after fights, because the way towards the new zone is already pretty much cleared, and your teammate's already showing up now as well. But a possible disadvantage is that a lot of people might rotate into you and punish you. Now, I want to go back right here for a second, because this is one of the cardinal sins that I've mentioned in one of my previous videos that I really want you to try and learn to stop doing as soon as possible, and that is taking your shots too early, especially when an enemy is unaware of you. You saw an enemy that was not aware of you, you had a safe position, you had a solid sideline where he had very little to no cover, and you knew he was about to stand still, and you shot before lining up the headshots. You could have magged him down, one-magged him down with the R301 before he even turned around, and you risked a kill right there when it was as free as it could possibly be. The other reason that I'm pointing this out is because if you start shooting off center, so if your target acquisition is not accurate, you will have to overcompensate for that in your early shots. And that usually happens around the same time that it takes the enemy to turn around and start strafing, which usually leads to a lot of over-aiming to try and overcompensate, because you're overcompensating for how much your aim is off as well as their movement at the same time, and that usually lends to messing up your aim. So take a little bit of extra time when you can in situations like this to make sure that first shot is on point, because it will make the rest of your aiming far easier. Next, I would like to talk about your decision to flank after downing the first opponent. Now, the first knock you get is very good, you're in an advantageous position and your teammates have caught up, so far very good, and I really like flanking to push in aggressively when you have your teammate support, but you don't have any information about whether there are 2 or 3 enemies in total, about what weapons they have, what legends they're playing, and yet you seem to be completely willing to give up your advantage of the high ground. You only heard one of the possible opponents, so they certainly know where you are. Now, it ends up working out, but I am starting to question your decision on whether you have enough advantages to push in. I think this was a questionable push, and you could have certainly been punished for it quite easily. When you had enough advantages, you just seem to give them up quite easily. So I want to see you be a bit more thoughtful in how you approach fights, because you have enough advantages to work with, you just tend to throw them out a little bit too easily. Alright, next up I want to talk again about the weapon loadout that you have, and not about what I would do differently about it now that you have access to more loot once again, but rather if you're going to run a Devotion or 301 or whatever you run, at least play to the advantages of your loadout, your legend and your weapons, as well as whether you have grenades and your armor. Right now you don't have any close range weapons, so being inside of market is just not an ideal place to drop down to fight or to stay. Being on top of market is much better, You also have not scouted yet for any of those enemy rotations we were talking about, so your decision to go outside here I like quite a lot, and you notice an enemy team there, which is good. Your position on top out in the open I don't really like. Before starting this fight I would really recommend you change up that position, because you are very vulnerable over there, especially with your weapons where you have to expose yourself for a long time. It's also difficult to jump back onto the roof from there, so it's just overall not very ideal. We also see you do the same thing again of giving up the high ground, not waiting for your team, and just taking a fight against as many opponents as you want, even in close range when you don't have any weapons that are good at that. So I see you do a bunch of good things like using Void Walk to avoid damage and getting behind cover, using a battery next to a door. That's all very good, but a lot of the advantages that you give yourself through playing well, you instantly give up as soon as you smell an enemy, and that's just one of the reasons why you get into such risky situations. So let's go back for one last time and talk about the things you could have done differently in this fight. First of all, you should not have jumped out here in the open, because it's not a terribly good spot and you had a perfectly good high ground behind you. You should not 1v2 from this close if you could wait for your teammates and when you have weapons that are better suited to long range combat. And right there, from the direction you were being shot, as soon as you move just one step to the left, you've broken line of sight and there is not really anything they can do to hurt you. So I would not use Void Walk here, not only to save the cooldown in case you still need it, but it makes it easier for them to chase you, as there is a sound effect for them to follow. They will know that you are vulnerable after that because you've put it on a cooldown, and it will take longer for you to be able to respond or be able to heal. So instead of using your Void Walk, I would have just climbed to the high ground or healed regularly in the same spot. Then lastly, when you are inside, you decide to shoot the Bangalore first, which is very good. She just now got revived from when you downed her earlier, so you know she only has 30 health. But then, when the lifeline pushes as well, you decide to swap targets to the full health lifeline. There's no point to that. Either commit to the Bangalore and full kill her, after which you will go down when you challenge the lifeline, or finish her and then try to back out. Even if they res again, she will once again only have 30 health, and you'll be able to continue the fight from there. And that's one of the situations where saving the Void Walk for proper value is very important and would have made a difference here. You would not have gone down, as well as waiting for your teammates to be in a better position to help you out. Lastly, once you go down, you don't actually block the doorway that you're trying to use, and so when your teammate tries to res you, he gets punished for it. It was a bad res in the first place, but you could have definitely done a little better to block the door, since you were right next to it. With that said, I really hope this was helpful. Peace.
Hit 125 purple armor. One down. Yeah, the other one is the one I hit with my Kraber.
Done.
There's one more right here. I'm gonna no-scope him. I no-scoped him.